So, we're starting with Romeo and Juliet. Pretty much the most popular Shakespeare play. Don't think that's a particularly controversial statement. It's the age-old story of a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old falling in love at first sight. Then a week later, 5 people are dead. Just a classic romance. For worse or better, this text has kind of been clouded by centuries of cultural cliché. It's always been quoted, parodied, generally taken out of context. So we're going to go straight to the actual text itself and see what Shakespeare wrote. But before we do that, let's have some helpful background information. So, who wrote it? Well, Shakespeare. Obviously. What is it about? It's about the story of an ancient feud between two households, the Montagues and the Capulets, and how their heirs, Romeo and Juliet, fall in love despite the odds. Now, it's based on the narrative poem, The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet, written by Arthur Brooke in 1562, which itself was based on earlier Italian folk stories. Now, kind of a clue, but where is it set? Well, Verona, in Italy, if you didn't guess from the earlier thing. Now, what's the setting? Again, Italy, big surprise. It's sort of in the Renaissance, early to mid-Renaissance, but again, that's a bit vague, and it will change depending upon the production you watch. And finally, when was it written? Now, being careful, because Shakespeare plays are notoriously hard to date. We think between 1595 and 1596. Now, with that out of the way, before we start, I want to make one thing very clear. Make sure that you don't read the text as your first experience of this or any Shakespeare play. Shakespeare is designed to be seen and performed, not read. At least not at first. By all means, have the text open as you watch this video or one of the productions that I will have linked in the description. But if you read it first, on its own, that is the single most likely way to kill your enjoyment of this play. Now, all those caveats out of the way, we'll get on with the plot. So everyone with a prologue. A random chorus member comes on stage, recites a sonnet that we've all heard a million times, spoils the plot for us, and then blatantly lies about the runtime, because, 2 hours. In your dreams is this play 2 hours. We see then 2 Capulets making some rather rude jokes about the Montagues, when, guess what, 2 Montagues happen to show up. How convenient is that? There's a bit of a back and forth, during which some Elizabethan insults get thrown about, biting one's thumb. How very rude. So the only sensible character in the entire play, a man named Benvolio, tries to break all this up, but then the most stereotypical moustache-twirling idiot in the form of a one Tybalt gets seemingly offended by Benvolio's existence. So, 3 guesses as to whether this remains peaceful or not. We then get the heads of the household show up, and it's about to become a full-blown brawl when the Prince of Verona, having already dealt with this nonsense twice before, finally blows his top and threatens execution for anyone who starts a fight ever again. Well, there we go. I'm sure we won't see any more violence in this entire play. We also find out that Lord Montague's son, Romeo, has been extra mopey recently, and no one can work out why. So they get D.I. Benvolio on the case, and he begins his investigation. We quickly learn that Romeo, rather than almost getting stabbed by Tybalt, like the normal Montague boys, is in love. No, not with Juliet. That would make him consistent. Instead, he's pining for a girl called Rosaline, someone he's never met, is also a Capulet, and has sworn she'll remain chaste until she's married. Probably because Romeo can be a bit on the stalky side. Of course, this makes our main man very sad. You can see why I share in Benvolio's exasperation. Oh, next we meet nobody's favourite character, Paris. Now he's trying to set himself up with Juliet, but Lord Capulet, quite sensibly, is like, dude, She's 13 years old, give it a few years. Instead, he invites him to this party with a fantastically long invite list, but being a genius, clearly, gives this invite list to a servant who cannot read. So Romeo, although he's still doing his best moody Hamlet impression, is willing to help this poor guy out, and guess who he finds out is on the invite list? That's right, good old Rosalind. So Benvolio, completely done with Romeo's whining, suggests they sneak into this party so he can prove that Rosalind really isn't that special compared with the rest of the Capulet girls. And this is a great plan that I can't see backfiring even slightly. So then we cut to Casa Capulet and the nurse and Juliet's mother talking about how fast their little girl's growing up. The nurse starts doting and then launches into a monologue that would rival Hamlet in length if Mama Capulet didn't get things back on topic, which is, of course, Juliet's marriage to Paris. Now, Juliet isn't opposed, necessarily, and just plans to mingle with him tonight. To see whether she likes him or not. It's almost quite sensible. Oh, here we go, it's party time! Romeo, Benvolio, and a certain fan favourite character show up. But Romeo, of course, is still moaning that it might be a bad idea. And this earns him a colossal amount of flack from Mercutio, who seems to only exist for the opportunity to take the mick out of Romeo. There's a quick back and forth which ends in Mercutio's famous Queen Mab speech, establishing some key character traits of his. He's intelligent, witty, eloquent, and also absolutely mental. Having fully roasted Romeo, the pair finally convince him to actually come to the masked party with them. We get a bit of a random aside with the stressed out servants, and then Capulet greets everyone, but doesn't recognise the two Montagues in his mist. He has a back in my day moment with one of his older mates, and then everyone's having a great time, including Juliet. Something that Romeo notices right away. Suddenly, Rosalind's the last thing on his mind, and he starts harassing a random servant to find out who this girl is. Unfortunately, for everyone involved, Tybalt recognises his voice, and, operating on a stab first, ask questions later policy, tries to start a fight. But Capulet, having an iota of sense, vetoes that idea and sends the angry Catman back to his room for a timeout. Romeo, meanwhile, has just grabbed Juliet's hand, not creepy at all, and started randomly reciting poetry at her. Turns out, she's into that, and they share this beautiful little sonnet for passionately snogging. Aww. But, quick reality check, they get split up, and Romeo learns that she's literally the most important child of his greatest enemy. So the Montagues and crew decide to get out of Dodge, and even though he knows who they are, Capulet lets them go. As Romeo disappears out of the door, Juliet also gets slapped in the face with the fact that he's a Montague, and they really can't be together. I'm sure they'll both be really sensible and not pursue this obviously dangerous relationship. Now the chorus comes back on with an even more useless sonnet. He says, Romeo's affections have switched from Rosalind to Juliet. Really, thank you, Captain Obvious. I never would have worked that out without you. Thank you. Now, because Romeo totally isn't a stalker, he gives the other two the slip to visit Juliet. We then get our daily dose of Mercutio tearing Romeo a new one. Then, Juliet shows up at a window. Oh, so yes, it's a window, not a balcony. Balcony wasn't a word back then, so it's famously known as the balcony scene today, but the word is actually nowhere in the text. It's a window. The window scene. Sorry. Slight tangent there. Anyway, she, having the sensible expectation that the boy she's just met isn't hiding in her back garden, wishes she could be with him. He, being less sensible, shouts a greeting to her. What follows is 20 minutes of Juliet trying to get Romeo to understand that this is neither the time nor the place for him to confess his undying love for her. It's genuinely the funniest scene in the play. So they agree to get married the next day because, of course they do. Then Romeo leaves after they almost get caught by the nurse about 6 times. Conveniently, Romeo is friends with a random friar, because that's a very normal thing for a teenage boy to be doing, and apparently Friar Lawrence disapproved of his pining for Rosalind, but despite some initial concerns, he's completely on board with this even more dangerous match. The first in a long line of bad decisions, he agrees to marry them that very day. And Mercutio continues to take the mick out of Romeo even when he's not there, and the mick out of Tybalt, and the mick out of Benvolio, and the mick out of himself, and the mick out of anything, basically, that moves. However, Romeo, once he does arrive, starts up some banter, and it's far more even between him and Mercutio. Mercutio enjoys this. However, he then gets distracted by the arrival of the nurse and her manservant. The nurse, who is looking for Romeo on Juliet's orders, was not prepared, however, for Mercutio to start flirting with her. And if you want to read into the fact that she flirts back, that's up to you. So Mercutio starts singing because what else did you expect? Only after he leaves does Romeo tell the nurse they will be married that afternoon. Then he bribes her, just cause. We then cut to Juliet complaining about how old and slow the nurse is, despite the fact she's literally risking her job and potentially her life to set this marriage up. I am therefore unsympathetic to Juliet when the nurse arrives, winds her up and extorts a back rub out of her before she actually tells her about the marriage that afternoon. Next scene's fairly cute, just the prelude to the marriage, as rushed as it is. Plot twist! Mercutio's bored again, and with no Romeo around, he takes the mick out of Benvolio for suggesting that maybe they should go home and not get stabbed by Tybalt. Oh no. Too late. Now, how do we think Mercutio will react to this situation? Will he A. Remain calm and de-escalate the situation? B. Leave? Or C. Antagonise the murderous man with the sword? Tybalt, however, is only after Romeo's blood today, and once the newlywed arrives, predictably starts swinging a sword in his face. But Romeo, being all loved up as he is, doesn't want to fight. Mercutio, however, is all for it. Whether he just wants to annoy Romeo or kick Tybalt's ass is unclear. So Tybalt, being a very sensible man, he says no. Just kidding. Cue the fight music! Dun 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 dun. Romeo, understandably, wants the duel to stop. However, he doesn't quite understand that there are consequences of throwing yourself unarmed into a sword fight. So yes, I agree with Mercutio that it's Romeo's fault he got stabbed. Tybalt does a runner, and Mercutio falls back onto his old tactic of take the mick out of something until it stops bothering you. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work for mortal stab wounds. He blames Romeo, curses both their houses, then, rather anticlimactically, just dies off stage. But now we get to see angry Romeo, who takes precisely 3 seconds to start another fight with Tybalt, and only 5 more seconds after that to brutally murder him. I'm sure there'll be no consequences for these actions. Benvolio, just being the best person in this play, covers Romeo's back, but still tells the truth when he explains the events to the prince and the 2 heads of the households when they arrive. If you question why Shakespeare gives a character a page-long monologue explaining what literally just happened on stage, just don't do that thing. Obviously, Capulets are angry, Montagues are angry, but the prince, who, let's bear in mind, was related to Mercutio, who's now dead, is having just none of it. He decides to banish Romeo to Mantua, which, fair enough, he did just freaking murder someone. Of course, Juliet has no clue about any of this and has just finished her pretty little monologue about how much she loves Romeo. Nurse comes in, spoils all the fun. There's lots of angry words and crying about the murderous catman and the impulsive idiot that killed him. So then, Juliet asks the nurse to give Romeo her ring and arrange they meet up one last time. Romeo, as it turns out, is hiding with Friar Lawrence and crying like a baby. The friar reminds him he's only banished, not dead, at which point Romeo says he wished he was rather dead, at which point I, personally, would have told him to get out of my house and let the city guards deal with him. Honestly, I have just no sympathy for him. No sympathy at all. Nurse arrives, and Romeo tries to kill himself because he wasn't melodramatic enough. Then the friar slaps him round a bit and promises to smuggle Juliet to Mantua, so just please, for once in his play, stop whining. Meanwhile, Lord Capulet thinks the best way to solve the family grief is to have a wedding. So he promises Paris that he can marry Juliet within the week. Something I'm pretty sure only Paris is happy about. Romeo and Juliet then wake up in her bedroom having, consummated their marriage. Let's just forget that she's 13 years old. Romeo then goes to leave, just as the nurse busts in saying the parents are on their way. So, kisses her one last time before Mission Impossibling it out of her window, just as the mum arrives. However, once Juliet hears about this marriage idea with Paris, she is understandably against it. And I'm sure her father will understand. It's not like he's, one of the angriest characters in Shakespearean literature. Not at all. So yeah, after a little threat of disowning, some stonewalling by her mother, and the nurse suddenly deciding that Paris is, way more attractive than Romeo, Juliet decides to go to Friar Lawrence. Of course, Friar Lawrence, after watching Juliet firmly plant Paris in the friend zone, has to stop another teen suicide by encouraging fake teen suicide? Yay? He gives her a potion that makes her seem dead, and it's not dodgy at all that he happens to just, have that on him, but he promises after she's drunk it, he'll smuggle her out of Verona to Mantua so they can live in peace. Now Juliet goes back to her father, apologises, and agrees to the marriage with Paris. Capulet then decides to move the wedding to tomorrow, just in case she changes her mind. It's a top-class parent right there. Once alone, Juliet decides to drink this potion. However, because this is Shakespeare after all, she has to monologue for a page before actually getting on and doing it. So, everyone thinks she's dead. It's all very tragic. There's lots of crying and upset people, apart from our sneaky little friar there. Also, randomly, just on the side, there are some musicians who are just annoyed they can't play the wedding gig. But, they play the funeral instead, so I guess it's a win-win for them. Of course, Romeo doesn't know about any of this. Juliet, not the musicians. Though I'm sure he doesn't know about them either. He's currently busy monologuing about how much he loves her. Then, Balthazar, a character from the start of the play, I'm sure that none of you actually remember, and he comes to tell him Juliet is dead. Now, Romeo, of course, would never act rashly to this news, no. He would never, ever plan an elaborate suicide. He would never bully an out-of-work apothecary to give him some poison for said suicide. No, I don't think he'd ever do that. No, that would be just far too impulsive for Romeo, don't you think? Now, remember that elaborate plan of Friar Lawrence's? Well, guess who screwed it up? Friar John. You had one job, Friar John. Make sure Romeo gets the letter so he knows Juliet's not actually dead. One job. Oh, what's that? You got quarantined? It's a poor excuse. A very poor excuse, especially nowadays. God damn it, Friar John. You had one job. Paris, despite being a wet fish, has come to pay his respects to Juliet's grave. So, I'll give him brownie points for that. Unfortunately, he arrives at the same time as Romeo, who, rather aggressively, threatens Balthazar to leave him alone and let him get on with what he's about to do. Of course, Romeo is technically a criminal, so you can't really blame Paris for trying to stop him. However, you can blame Romeo for then straight up killing him in cold blood. Our hero, ladies and gentlemen. He then opens the grave, monologues for a solid 2 pages, drinks the poison, and finally, stops whining. Now, Friar Lawrence, master planner that he is, arrives just too late and finds the now dead Romeo just as Juliet wakes up. Now, with the guards now on their way, thanks to Paris' servant, Lawrence urges her to leave with him, but, well, you all know where this is going. Determined to kill herself as well, she attempts poison by bottle, poison by kiss, before settling on the Good old, tried and tested, dagger to the heart method. By this point, everyone's arrived, and Balthazar and Lawrence have been caught. We also learn that Romeo's mother died off screen over grief from his banishment, in case you hadn't quite clocked that this is a tragedy yet. The prince, baffled as to why for the second time in a week he is standing over a sea of teenage corpses, asks for someone, anyone, to explain to him what the hell happened. Between them, Balthazar and Friar Lawrence explain that Romeo and Juliet were in love, and then the events that led to their death. The realisation that their feud has caused their children's death leads Capulet and Montague finally to make up with one another. And finally, the play ends on the prince's famous couplet, as we're left with a tableau of two dead teenagers. A glooming peace this morning with it brings. The sun for sorrow will not show his head. Go hence to have more talk of these sad things. Some shall be pardoned, and some punished. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. Alack the day when one begins to beg, when the powers above thou hast to bribe, but if thou this fine channel wish to peg, then, good fellows, I implore you, subscribe. Alas, but still thou shalt not be informed if this author a tale he has to tell. My heart would thus be eternally warmed, if like cries of yore thou ring'st the bell. Last, if thou finds an item thou dost enjoy, allow me yet another deal to strike. Thine patronage I would seek to employ, therefore, fine friend, feel free to drop a like. But now we end, and I wish thee luck, and pray thou friends, forgive this rambling